we're going to dive in, and we're going to be looking at material from her book. And one of the first sections of her book that I'd like to look to has to do with that issue that I was talking about earlier, the uniformitarian principle. And specifically, I would like us to look at some evidence from sedimentation layers and rocks. In Chapter 5, you talk about some of these issues. And if I bring up on the screen this is from Chapter 5. You have catastrophic formation of sedimentary rock layers. And you mentioned a number of things that are offered as evidence in support of the idea that sedimentary rock layers were formed catastrophically. It wasn't a gradual process over millions of years, but it was laid down very rapidly. And I have some of them on the screen right here. Turbidites, cross-bedding, very widespread, large-scale patterns in sedimentary rock layers, e.g. direction of water flows indicated in rocks. If you can do us the favor of explaining those four things on the screen, that would be great.
Okay. One thing just to say, before we sort of launch into looking at this in detail, and I've got a copy of the book here, so I obviously wrote the book some years ago. It was 2009 when the book came out.
So around 12 years.
12 years old now. I have thought for a long time that I really ought to do a revised edition and bring it up to date, because a lot of work has been done, obviously, since the book came out.
Okay.
And so there are some developments on certain sections of the book that, perhaps we can sort of pick up on as we go along. But so going back to this particular section here,
right,
catastrophic formation of sedimentary rock layers, really I was just trying there to build a brief summary of just some of the evidences that we find in the geological record for catastrophic deposition.
Okay.
Basically, geology today is essentially neo-catastrophist. So I think most geologists today recognise that catastrophic processes are perhaps the dominant process in forming a good proportion of the rocks in the Earth's geological record.
Okay.
As opposed to obviously the uniformitarian principle was based on the assumption that the kind of slow, gradual processes that we observe typically going on today in modern environments were applicable in the past. But I think increasingly geologists have recognised the role of catastrophes.
Okay.
These catastrophes are obviously embedded in the mainstream view within a framework of long ages of Earth history.
Okay.
So geologists tend to think of the mainstream geologists tend to think of the geological record as extremely incomplete. So you have sedimentary deposits which were formed under catastrophic conditions, but then you have an awful lot of time when normal processes are prevailing that perhaps isn't recorded in the geological record. So this is kind of how catastrophes are understood in that sort of old Earth framework. But from a creationist perspective, the fact that catastrophism, or at least neo-catastrophism, is now sort of the prevailing view in geology is very interesting, because there is real resistance among geologists to anything that sort of smacks of a biblical perspective, including a worldwide flood. So I think the evidence for catastrophism in the rocks has to be extremely strong for geologists to kind of overcome that resistance and kind of read the rocks in that catastrophic way.
And are you saying that geologists have, over the past 12 years, actually moved in that direction?
Not so much in the last 12 years, but it's been over a number of decades, really. There was a book that was published in the, I think, early 70s by Derek Ager, who was he was president of the Geologists Association here in the UK. He was chairman of the geology department at Swansea University. Mm-hmm. So, a very prominent geologist. He was an atheist, right, and he published a book called The Nature of the Stratigraphical Record. And in that book, he basically made an appeal for a neo-catastrophist interpretation of the record. And that's really become pretty mainstream today.
Okay.
So what are some of the evidences then? The first one that I mentioned there in the book are what's known as turbidites. So these are kind of sediment slurries that they're sort of underwater landslides in effect.
Okay.
So you might have an unstable body of sediment in relatively shallow water, something, whether it's just the gravitational instability, or whether there's an earthquake or something causes that sediment to be disturbed. It slumps, moves down slope into deeper water under the influence of gravity. It's a kind of ground-hugging slurry of sediment, and they move really fast. They kind of move at the speed your car travels along the motorway.
Wow.
And they can deposit sediment layers, in a matter of minutes, hours.
Okay.
So turbidites are very common in the rock record. They're very common types of sediments. They can be recognised because they have a distinctive structure. They're graded beds, so you have coarser particles at the bottom, and then the sedimentary particles get finer as you go up through the bed.
Okay.
And you typically get repeating sequences of these turbidites,
Okay.
often hundreds or thousands of feet thick, of just repeating sequences of these turbidite layers.
How
so
thick
they're
did
very
you just
very
say?
common rocks. They can be sort of hundreds or thousands of feet thick, but
Wow.
made up of many repeating turbidite
Okay.
layers. One stacked.
So
on top
one
of
goes
another.
by, and then another comes by.
Then another comes by.
Yeah, don't be
And
scuba
in-
diving in that area when it comes.
Right, and
Right.
in the conventional view, of course, they would interpret those as occasional events. So you
Okay.
get an event that causes a turbidite layer to be deposited, and then maybe there's a time gap of I don't know, hundreds, even thousands of years before the next one comes in. But we can come back to this. Are those time gaps real? Or are we looking at a continuous sequence of catastrophic sedimentation?
Okay, and is there
But
evidence
that's-
from the turbidites themselves that would indicate it's catastrophic and laid over a smaller period of time?
Well, the individual turbidite layers certainly are.
Okay.
I think we can come back to ask the question about the time gaps, the potential time gaps between the layers, because that's a very important point. Quite often, where we expect evidence of missing time, we don't really see it.
You have that the time between sedimentary layers was quite short. One, lack of erosion between layers. Two, fine preservation of many layers. Lack of, for example, burrowing. Is
Yes.
this the type of thing that
Yeah.
you would look for between turbidites and not seeing that evidence, or seeing the lack of
Yeah.
erosion and not seeing the burrowing? You would conclude it had to have been a short time between the two depositions. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, exactly. So quite often, if you think about sedimentation today, imagine you get a sediment layer that's deposited on the floor of the shallow ocean. Now turbidites are a bit different because they typically sort of build up in moderately deep water. But think about a layer on the floor of the shallow ocean. That layer is very vulnerable to erosion, from tides, from storms, and so on. And so you expect to see erosion, and the same would be true of layers. If you had a sedimentary layer that was laid down in a flood on a floodplain, and then you have a period of erosion, you're going to expect to find gullies and channels, and the unit basically being eaten into by erosion. And quite often, what you find is that the contacts between these layers are very sharp, and the evidence of the expected erosion
Is not there.
isn't there.
Okay.
And the other thing, of course, is that even if the sedimentary deposit is not being actively eroded,
Right.
certainly in the shallow oceans, the oceans teem with invertebrates that are going to come in and colonize that layer. They're going to burrow through that layer to feed,
Okay.
to build their homes. And this burrowing, which we call bioturbation, is very effective at destroying sedimentary layering. So experiments have been done in laboratory settings where you have these invertebrates, on a fresh sedimentary layer, and they will just homogenize that layer. They'll destroy all of the structure in that layer within an hour. Within an hour of deposition.
Okay.
so they get to work really fast.
Right.
And again, when you see layering that is very well preserved, when you see all of the internal structures in beds well preserved, not destroyed by bioturbation, then you have to ask questions about whether that layer really was exposed for any length of time. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Credible Faith is a global missions-minded apologetics ministry with content available in 7 different languages across 7 websites: German, Russian, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. If you would like to support the global apologetics work of Credible Faith, go to crediblefaith.org and click on the donate icon. If you would like me to give an apologetics workshop or participate in a debate at your university, or if you would like me to give a Great Commission missions conference or apologetics conference at your church, get in touch with me through the Contact Us section of the Credible Faith website. You can also submit a request through the website to get Credible Faith's monthly email. If you are a native speaker of Russian, German, Italian, French, Spanish, or Portuguese, and if you notice that an essay from the English website is not available on the Credible Faith website for your language, feel free to get in touch with me about translating the essay, and I would read through your translated material for quality control and the desire to see content from the essay made available in your language. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.